What exactly has gone wrong for the Boston Bruins here in 2024-25?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. It's free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Today on the podcast, it's been a couple of days since the Bruins played. We're in the midst of the Four Nations face-off break. We'll preview Canada versus Sweden later on in the podcast, but I wanted to take kind of a step back and discuss what exactly has gone wrong for the Bruins this season and why are they outside of the playoff picture at this point. Can it be salvaged? And really, should this season be attempted to be salvaged? Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. And if you tuned into yesterday's episode, you would have noticed that I was battling with this very annoying beeping sound in the background. I thought it was the smoke detector. Nope. I thought it was my alarm clock. Nope. Turns out it was a karaoke microphone that had been left on, and it was a signal that the battery was dying, and it shut off by itself moments after I finished recording. And that's just kind of the season it's been for these Boston Bruins. Not quite going as we had expected. Right now, they are outside of the playoff picture, and there's been quite a number of factors adding up to keep them from succeeding this season. You can kick it back all the way to the offseason to look at where things went awry. After the Bruins lost to the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup playoffs, a lot of the talk about how to move forward and how to build on that was getting younger, getting faster, and building on the strengths that we see already on the roster. And what did they do? In free agency, they went out and got bigger and slower. There's no way to spin it other than that. They added Nikita Zadorov, a big, hulking defenseman who has some offensive skill, but who has proven to be a league leader in only one area this season, and that is penalty minutes. They also added Elias Lindholm, who is not the fastest guy in the world and who has certainly not lived up to the 7-year, $7.75 million per season contract that he was awarded. The story we were told at the time is that these Bruins were built for the playoffs. They also added Max Jones, who's a bigger body, Riley Tufte, who hasn't been in the lineup for quite some time. And, of course, traded Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for a big body in Dean Letourneau, who was drafted in the first round, and Mark Kastelic, who has been one of the bright spots for the Bruins this season when he's been in the lineup. So, there were those decisions that were made for beefing the team up in the playoffs, not counting for the fact that they might not even make it to the playoffs. Then you go through the whole summer without a contract for Jeremy Swayman, despite the fact that Ullmark was traded early in the offseason. You have what we learned later were offseason reparations done on the bodies of David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand, so they didn't have regular offseason regimens and didn't come into training camp at optimal peak shape and form. You had Lindholm himself battling an injury in training camp. You had Jeremy Swayman's contract stalemate going all through camp, where he missed training camp and therefore was playing catch up to begin the regular season. That all amounted to a pretty tough start, which led to the coaching change. Jim Montgomery fired and Joe Sacco promoted to interim head coach. You had slow starts from both Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha, who were coming off career seasons last year. Pastrnak, like I mentioned, started off a bit slower because of that offseason repair work, as did Brad Marchand to a certain extent. You had your best player to begin the season in Hampus Lindholm injured a dozen games in, and he has yet to play. What else has there been? You had spots left open for some young players to step up that were not given to them. Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov, even Matt Patra beginning or spending the majority of the season down in the AHL. There were a couple call-ups here and there, but only Patra has been able to stick, and he's been playing very well as of late, to be sure. Jeremy Swayman, of course, like I mentioned, has started off the season very slowly and still has a sub 900 save percentage. The penalty kill has been not great. The power play is near the bottom of the league. They are near the bottom in terms of goals scored per game. They're near the bottom in terms of goals allowed per game. So when you look at what has gone wrong for the Boston Bruins this season, pretty much everything. And from even beyond day one of training camp, with the extended contract stalemate between the Bruins and the camp of Jeremy Swayman. You had a lot of roster turnover. I don't think you can, discount the subtraction of Linus Ullmark and the effect that had in the locker room, especially on Swayman, as they were more than best friends. They became like brothers over the past couple of seasons. You have the addition of some big bodies, big presences, big players in Zadorov and Lindholm, and all the pressure that comes with those contracts, acclimating to a new city, a new locker room, a new system, and also a second system, seeing as Jim Montgomery was let go fairly early on in the season. Add it all up, and things have not gone according to plan at all for Don Sweeney, Cam Neely. And you can also make a very real argument that those two guys aren't necessarily always on the same page. Sweeney came out saying they need that speed. Neely intervenes and advocates for the signings of Lindholm and Zadorov. And while Sweeney said, yeah, we've coveted these guys for a while, perhaps the team president, being closer to the money in the Jacobs family, pulling the strings a bit more behind the scenes than we care to admit. And some of the blame should be on, if Don Sweeney's on the hot seat, then certainly Cam Neely should be as well, because they are pretty in tandem there, and Neely really does call a bunch of the shots. So all of that together has culminated in the Bruins being outside of the playoff picture, heading into the Four Nations face-off. They're 10th in the Eastern Conference in terms of total points. They're even further behind when it comes to point percentage, and they have the fourth worst goal differential in the Eastern Conference. Can this season be salvaged? And maybe more to the point, should this season be salvaged? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Are you looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle. Whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto, Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day. The convenience of Factor is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. Eat smarter with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box with Factor. Can the Bruins season be salvaged? Should the Bruins season be salvaged? Now, despite all of what I mentioned earlier and the numbers that are not very encouraging, the Bruins still are in the thick of the Eastern Conference playoff race. They're 1 point back of the second wild card spot, held right now by the Detroit Red Wings. The Red Wings do have 2 games in hand. The Bruins are 2 points back of the first wild card spot, which is currently held by the Ottawa Senators, who have 1 game in hand. They're 6 points behind the Tampa Bay Lightning for third in the Atlantic. Tampa has 2 games in hand. So not only are the Bruins behind the opposition in terms of points, but they have played more games than the opposition or teams they're chasing for a playoff spot, which puts them behind the 8 ball when it comes to point percentage, which currently sits at .526. They're just ever so slightly behind the New York Rangers at .527. And you have the Columbus Blue Jackets at .536. Senators, Red Wings in those wildcard spots at .554 and .555, respectively. So it's going to be an uphill battle for the Boston Bruins, and there's a big enough sample size here to suggest this team is what it is. Again, 57 games, a record of 27, 24, and 6. That's 27 wins and 30 losses. They have a minus 25 goal differential. It was minus 21 when Jim Montgomery is fired. So there was some improvement under Joe Sacco, but they're still at a negative goal differential under the interim head coach. When it comes to overall team stats, they sit in terms of goals for per game. They're at 25th in the NHL. Goals allowed per game is 24th. Remember, it's the top 16 teams that make the playoffs. Generally, could be some wonkiness in terms of the standings because of the format, but Bruins 25th, 24th in terms of offense and defense. The power play is ranked 30th, and the penalty kill is currently ranked 25th. That's 25th in goals for, 24th in goals allowed, 30th on the power play, 25th in terms of the penalty kill. Does that suggest to you that they are a playoff team? No. Does it suggest that if they were to make the playoffs, that they could compete and contend? No. They're well outside of the top 20 teams in the NHL in all of these categories. This isn't an issue of the Bruins having, say, bad puck luck per se, because if you look at natural stat trick and you look at 5-on-5 play where the majority of the game is played, and you look at the Bruins numbers in terms of shooting percentage and save percentage at 5-on-5, teams well above 100 are said to be having some pretty good puck luck, and perhaps it's not necessarily sustainable. Teams well below 100 are perhaps a bit unlucky, and there's some positive regression coming. The Bruins are currently hovering right around that 100 mark. They're at 100.5, in fact, which is 12th in the NHL. So if anything, they have a bit of regression still to come. They're at 884 when it comes to shooting percentage, which is 14th in the NHL, so right around the midway point. Save percentage, 5-on-5. They sit at 11th in the NHL. So 5-on-5, they've been okay. They are kind of what they are. One of the big problems with this team, of course, is the constant stream to the penalty box, their inability to kill penalties, and more importantly, their inability to score on the power play. So, can the season be salvaged? It's not looking great. Should it be salvaged? Well, there's a great argument to be made for scratching this season off, starting fresh with Jeremy Swayman signed for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, everybody healthy in the offseason and coming into training camp fully having done their offseason training regimens. You have Lindholm and Zadorov with a year under their belts. They're coming in more comfortable next season. You have a healthy Hampus Lindholm. And you have some retooling having been done in the meantime. I'm on team keep Brad Marchand for the record, although I did advocate a couple years ago for him to be traded. And there's certainly an argument to be made for that as well, because as discussed on the podcast the other day, his value is extremely high. And if you want to get the most out of a possible retool, then he's a guy that you look at trading. But whether or not that's the best idea, who knows? There are some pieces you can and should move, a la Trent Frederick, perhaps Morgan Geekie. I'm not opposed to exploring deals for Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo as well, to get a bit younger here and get speedier. You need to recoup some prospects. You need to recoup some picks after having gone all in on several occasions in recent history. And you need to get a bit younger here, find some more scoring, guys who can chip in on the power play, see what you have in Merkulov and Lysell, and make some more informed decisions here this coming offseason. With the cap going up in the next couple of years, you'll have even more opportunity to build around your core of Swayman, McAvoy, Pasternak, and the cap hits for Zadorov and Lindholm will look a bit more manageable as the cap goes up. They're taking less space against the cap. Again, if they were to make the playoffs, it would probably be a one and done, as we saw from the Capitals last season. They squeaked in, just absolutely torched by the Rangers in round one. But with some creativity in the mix in the offseason, they were able to retool, and they're now one of the best teams in the NHL this season. Not to compare the two, it's not a direct comparison, as the Capitals do have some homegrown talent that has emerged, like Alexei Protas and Connor McMichael, but they made some savvy trades in acquiring Jacob Chikrin, Pierre-Luc Dubois. That's the kind of thing the Bruins need to do. Some bigger swings to bring in some more effective players here to complement the core. Kind of a swing and a miss with Zadorov and Lindholm so far. But there's a real opportunity here for Don Sweeney to recognize that it's not a time to be a buyer, to sell, and to get some picks, perhaps some prospects, maybe some roster players with control. And with the cap going up, it will be easier to do a bit of a retool here for the Boston Bruins. In the more immediate future, Don Sweeney is currently with Team Canada as general manager of that squad in the Four Nations face-off. Begins tonight with Canada taking on Sweden in Montreal, and we'll do a quick preview of that game here as the podcast continues. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fueled longer. The fact that Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids is such a bonus, and these little green wonders do indeed pack a protein punch. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs that protein punch. Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Canada, Sweden, tonight, Four Nations face-off beginning in Montreal. Brad Marchand taking on Elias Lindholm. We discussed yesterday kind of the rooting guide. Every team represented by a member of the Bruins, except for Team Finland. If you want to remain neutral, root for them. But tonight, I will indeed be rooting hard for Team Canada. Brad Marchand playing on a line with Braden Point of the Tampa Bay Lightning and Seth Jarvis of the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, a big story was who would start for Team Canada. If you've been following along, Bruins general manager Don Sweeney and the rest of the Brain Trust brought along Sam Montembeault, Aiden Hill, and Jordan Binnington, leaving guys off the roster who have been playing much better than them, namely Mackenzie Blackwood, Logan Thompson, Darcy Kemper. All three of those guys have better numbers than any of the three that are on the team. John Cooper, head coach, has decided to go with Binnington for tonight's game against Sweden. Kind of an interesting decision, and largely based on his track record from 2019 when he beat the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup final with the St. Louis Blues. Cooper said, this kid has played in some huge moments, some big games. He's a competitor. And Don Sweeney added, I had a front row seat to Jordan Binnington rising to that occasion. No qualms about which goaltender is going into the net. So pretty tough to stomach there as a Canadian hockey fan, having to root for Binnington, who as a 25-year-old helped lead the Blues to that Stanley Cup win in Game 7 in Boston. It's pretty distressing to be sure. And Binnington hasn't even been all that good this season for the Blues. Kind of outplayed by his backup, Joel Hofer. He's got a .897 save percentage this season, 59-4 under head coach Jim Montgomery. Curious decision there, but I will still be rooting for Team Canada tonight, of course. Now, on the other side of things, Elias Lindholm will be skating on the fourth line, I believe, and not playing a hugely prominent role. The Swedes have an embarrassment of riches on the blue line, of course. Victor Hedman, Rasmus Dahlin, Jonas Brodin, Gustav Forsling, Matthias Ekholm, Erik Karlsson. So to suggest that Canada is a runaway favorite in this one would be a fool's claim. And really, when you look at the four teams, you could really make an argument that it's Team USA's tournament to lose because they are just absolutely stacked, beginning from the back end out where they have Connor Hellebuck in net as the best goalie in the world at the moment. Lindholm skating in practice on a fourth line with Victor Arvidsson and Gustav Nyquist. He is also penciled in on the second penalty killing unit for Team Sweden alongside Jesper Bratt. Look for Brad Marchand to again skate with Braden Point and Seth Jarvis. And it's possible that he could get some time on the power play, but of course, Canada is pretty loaded with offensive talent. Right now, he is penciled in on the none of the penalty killing units, actually. Mitch Marner, Anthony Cirelli, Brendan Hagel, and Seth Jarvis getting a look at the penalty killing for Team Canada, despite the fact that Marchand is very strong on the penalty kill and has scored quite a number of shorthanded goals in his time. If one of those guys falters, look for Marshy to step up there, maybe even get some power play time. But again, Team Canada is so loaded offensively that he will not be asked to carry a huge load that way, but perhaps more relied upon for his leadership here in this tournament, with the view to being on the team next year at the Olympics. All right, that is it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, my friends. Thank you so much for taking some time to listen. If you have any other thoughts on what has gone wrong for the Bruins so far this season, please be sure to hit me up on social media or drop a comment on YouTube. Last night, we checked out the newest episode of Paradise, which is a new Hulu show from the creator of This Is Us, starring Sterling K. Brown and James Marsden, among others. Pretty entertaining show so far. Tonight, of course, be watching hockey, and we'll be back tomorrow to recap the storylines, stats, and signals from tonight's game between Canada and Sweden, with a focus on our boys, Marchand and Lindholm. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're taking care of yourselves, taking care of each other. Please do subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app and on YouTube if you have not already. And we'll be back tomorrow with a fresh episode of Locked On Bruins. Any breaking news will be found on the YouTube feed with a short. And it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Take care, friends. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow.